That's your favorite right there.
Oh, he didn't want that. I like it. Decent. Me only so much person here.
Eso, no sé si me será frase. One more next.
Thank you. Thank you.
I sit here. Proceed to do it.
Okay, those people have to go to church. Let's get started. Persons have things to do.
We appreciate y'all. This will be a quick class.
So what you giving up for lunch, Miss Asha?
Giving up sweets.
Sweets?
Sweets alright.
You like sweets?
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
I like cakes and pies and not often, but I like once a day or once every 2 days. I'll have an apple pie here. If someone give me a slice of birthday cake, I can't refuse. So it's none. Starting from today.
How you feel?
Terrible.
Sorry.
But I brought a box of Oreo cookies to work today. And it had they did instead of doing filling white,
See your
they
favorite
did
now.
it yellow. So it has yellow because it says the spring.
Yeah.
So that, and they're on my desk and they're sitting in the jar. Fresh, crisp Oreos.
You should let me come in and be sample of you.
Why you bring some here?
Straight from Miami.
Should've
It
bring-
ain't been on super value shelf for
Should I bring
days.
some here?
Fresh.
Should I bring some
Yeah.
here? Brian, she just asked for you.
I'm trying.
She just asked you.
This and all.
Of course.
She said, where's Brian?
First she said, where's everyone?
Yes.
Then she said, where's Brian?
Yes.
Specific.
How you put on that?
Yes. What do you want to in the back today?
You was concerned. Why you was
You know things, you know. You just know the things.
I know everything.
Yes.
She's getting further and further away from him. I don't know why.
You're intimidating.
No, I am. Come on, you said why you say that. I don't think so.
I just answered.
Yeah?
Well, like that's the moon face on that.
I don't think so.
No, you're not. I hope you bring your draft.
What happened again? So far, we've looked at governance. Okay? So what all does governance entail?
Senior management of the board.
On these procedures, large rules and regulations.
Very right, they set the tone.
You all right? You read up today?
You like governance or you like governance or something?
Governance.
I like governance is close.
This is governance, the risk, and compliance. So governance is on the board.
Yeah.
What's compliance about?
Policies, procedures.
Okay. So what's risk about?
The appetite
risk appetite, risk management,
Exposure that the
Yeah.
institution is
So
like,
accept.
capable of.
Risk
Right,
assessment.
so they put all of those together, they call it GRC. So once you working in that arm, where you're not dealing with AML, but you're dealing with compliance, it's compliance, risk, and governance together.
Okay, okay.
Because that's the way in which you look at things. Even though your job may be compliance, you still have to look at risk, and you still have to look at governance. They come together. So you still have to know a little bit about what risk each product and service exposes that your institution to. So let's go from 4.4. What are the risk management options? We have risk-based or cyclical approaches to risk management. So you have to decide which approach is the best approach.
4.4.
Yeah.
Page 233.
232.
Oh, 32.
In your book, 233?
I said it depends on how you print it.
Oh, okay. A risk-based approach is where those risks identified as having the highest potential impact and probability are prioritized. And you know, we always use here the risk-based approach. Second is the cyclical approach, where all identified risks are reviewed and action taken in a chronological order. So you already know when you do your assignment, you're gonna actually take your risk and you're gonna do it from a risk-based approach.
Okay.
And it says both approaches have advantages and disadvantages. So, when you use a risk-based approach, attention must be concentrated on addressing emerging high-impact, high-probability risk at the expense of ensuring that all risks are reviewed over the year. So remember when I told you last week we were speaking about your recommendations? This is how they want you to word it. When you're speaking about the risk, you have to say what approach your institution is taking towards your risk. Risk-based approach or the cyclical approach. And it says when you use the risk-based approach, the lower impact ones, you don't spend a lot of time on those. Because you focus on the high ones. So based upon what you've done so far and the risks that you have identified, you should be able to say which ones are high and which ones are low. In the cyclical approach, where time and effort is spent in reviewing low impact, low probability risks, which would have minimal effect if they materialize. The materialization of high impact, high probability risks, which are not being reviewed currently because they are scheduled for later in the review cycle. So in most instances for financial institutions, we use the risk-based approach, because that's the approach that the regulator takes. Let us speak next about what is the risk management function. And it refers to the function of setting and controlling risk exposure. So that's why in most institutions now, and you notice the change in the legislation, the institution must do a risk assessment. So in order to do a risk assessment, you either outsource it to an auditing firm or you hire a risk officer. But even though you hire a risk officer, you are in compliance, and if you are in compliance on the regulatory compliance side, you must know a little bit about risk management. So risk management regime, a firm's senior management must develop effective processes for identifying, managing, monitoring, and reporting the risks to which the firm is or might be exposed. Right, that's the first thing. You develop processes for identifying, managing, monitoring, and reporting the risks to which the firm is or might be exposed to. Now, while we go through this section, I want you to keep in your mind your assignment, because your assignment is dealing with risk. Establish, implement, and maintain adequate risk management policies and procedures, including effective procedures for risk assessment. So remember they just brought out some new tools for their staff? Right. So you have to think about the risk assessment. What's the risk? And where appropriate, set the level of risk tolerated by the firm. So when you're talking about the level of risk tolerated by the firm, and you're talking about tools that are gonna be used internally by the staff, then they're talking about what you can and cannot do, and how you will be penalized if you breach the policies. Adopt effective arrangements, processes, and mechanisms for managing the risk relating to the firm's activity, processes, and systems in light of the established level of risk tolerance. So remember when we first started, the first thing she said is you must know the company's risk appetite. After you know the appetite, then you have to put in place the risk tolerance. Approve and periodically review the strategies and policies for taking up, managing, mitigating, and monitoring the risks to which the firm is or might be exposed, including those posed by the macroeconomic environment in which it operates in relation to the current stage of the business cycle. Senior management must also monitor the adequacy and effectiveness of the firm's risk management policies and procedures. How can they do that? Because when you write your recommendation, your paper to the board, you cannot say that senior management is responsible for ensuring that the risk management policies are adequate and effective. How do they do that? Yes, and the frequency. And the frequency is based on the priority. The level of compliance by the firm and its directors, partners, employees, and appointed representatives with the arrangement and processes adopted as outlined above. The adequacy and effectiveness of measures taken to address any deficiencies in those policies, procedures, arrangements, processes, and mechanisms. And remember, we already decided in the question that they do have policies and procedures in place. So we hope when you write, you're gonna write about deficiencies. And then it speaks about how each firm will categorize its own risk. And when you do your whole risk assessment that we did last week, you should be able to categorize your risk. So now we go to what they call understanding critical risk types. I would say the first step you should use is the certified risk-based approach on their website. And they have already identified the inherent risk in a financial institution. You have the inherent risk and you have the residual risk. So they're saying that besides regulatory risk and compliance risk, there are other risks. And one is which we spoke about last week, reputational risk. This is a risk that a company's reputation in its market or with peers, suppliers, the public or employees will be damaged by the materialization of a risk event. So notice how this is worded. When you identify there is a risk and you're going to give a recommendation, you have to speak to the materiality of it and the event that it will occur in order to equate to it being a reputational risk. The risk almost inevitably arises following materialization of any risk in more or less any risk category. Safeguarding a firm's reputation is one of the most difficult and challenging tasks facing senior managers. Reputation is one of the most important corporate assets and also one of the most difficult to protect. Reputation can be a major source of competitive advantage. It's easy to damage reputation, but much more difficult to repair the damage once it is done. So based on this scenario, I know you said last week that you saw reputational damage. So how can you qualify that? Is your number one risk reputational damage in the scenario?
No.
No. It's not high risk.
No.
It had actually be minor risk
Yeah.
or low risk. The next risk is financial risk. This can include liquidity, which is not relevant in the scenario. Funding, no. Capital calculation risk, no. Credit risk, no. Tax reporting and tax compliance risk. Accounting policy risk, or budgeting and capital planning risk. I don't think we had a financial risk. No. We're still back to the two main ones, which is regulatory and compliance. Then it says, at the heart of any risk management system and controls are risk assessment and risk treatment, which we did last week. They are at the heart of it. Now who could confess whether they did theirs? Who did their risk assessment last week? When you went home?
You mean table?
Yes.
Number 2?
No, the table.
No, the table. Remember I said for the scenario, go through your risk assessment table. Remember?
You mean this one right here?
Yeah. You
I
see it?
started it.
Yeah, uh-huh. Yeah.
But she wants you to repeat what you said, the heart of it is.
Risk assessment and risk treatment. Systems and controls need to be open-ended so that the risk treatments are reviewed for effectiveness. This comes in your recommendation. And revised risk profiles are then fed into this risk identification and assessment components of the systems and controls. So what they're looking for is when you recommend, you have to recommend and you have to put a monitoring feature to it, and then how you're going to treat the risk. Who's going to manage this risk? In managing regulatory risk, compliance professionals understand the full and detailed requirements of systems and controls that are in place. Successful implementation and ongoing use of these systems and controls is a continuous process, using the planning, implementation, measurement, learning flow as they've done earlier in the section. So you plan, you implement, you measure, and then you learn. It's a process. You notice everything you do with GRC is process driven. So then they move to the link between G, R, and C. They said the relationship can be summarized in 4 different and separate processes. Risk assessment and planning. And you should have done that over the week. A firm faces risk at all levels, whether from global issues based on market conditions or environmental issues. Firms cannot plan for or identify every single risk that might have an impact, but they should monitor and analyze potential risks. And a potential risk is what I just finished saying. Based on your institution and the industry it is in, you must know what are the inherent risks in that business, the ones that naturally occur, and then you risk rate those. Risk identification and analysis. This is where there is a need for more detailed analysis of the likelihood that known risks will become issues, and if they do, the possible impacts. So you should have done that already. The impacts of identified risks need to be quantified so that mitigation strategies can be developed. And we discussed that last week. In context, mitigation refers to assessing the best ways to manage or eliminate the risk. So when you look at your assignment, which risks can be eliminated and which can be minimized? Those are the kind of words that they're looking for. You're either minimizing the risk, or you're mitigating the risk, or you're eliminating it. You have to use these words when you speak about GRC. This allows the firm to identify the total cost the firm will be facing should the risk become a real issue. Then you have to develop a risk response strategy. And this is developed alongside the risk identification activities. And this is where a firm needs to have plans and strategies to deal with the impacts of risk materialization. So in your recommendation, you're not just saying, implement this policy, amend that policy. You have to tell the board, if this was to materialize because this is a high risk, what is the impact on the organization? These strategies will also help the firm to return to normal operations as soon as possible. So that's why they give you the time frame. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. What do we need to do to get on track and get there fast? Developing this approach also allows firms to include analysis of any risk-related opportunities, which could, for example, include a review and overhaul of all products, not only to eliminate any identified risk, but to capitalize on opportunities that the risk analysis has revealed. So when you would have done your risk assessment, you should be able to determine whether there are any opportunities based upon your risk assessment. Because everything shouldn't be negative. Do you see an opportunity where either the company can do better? Risk monitoring. In a GRC control framework, risk monitoring is an integral control. Monitoring not only tracks the likelihood that identified risk will materialize, but also monitors its status once the mitigating actions are being completed. The idea is to keep on top of the position and, if needed, re-enter the risk management process. So that is your frequency. How often are you going to monitor it, and how often are you going to report it to the board? And that depends on whether or not it's high or it's low. So prioritization goes beyond risk ranking because it compares risk rather than just listing them. The comparisons can include business situations, control measures, hazards that the risks lead to, and so on. So you see, when you identify the risk, they want you to then qualify the risk. So don't just put this as high risk. They want you to say whether or not this risk is a business risk, this is a control issue, that's why this is a risk, which can lead to a financial risk. So it's the way in which you word the document tells them you understand GRC. So they say additional criteria which could include the following: the cost of intervention and any control measures that are devised, the feasibility of implementing the control measures, all is in your recommendation now. The practicality of the control measures, because that's what examiners are going to look at. When you write your recommendations, they're going to look for these features to see whether or not what you recommend is practical, whether it is feasible. Not necessarily that it makes sense and how you wrote it, but whether or not you can actually take it and it can actually be carried out. The effectiveness of the control measures, the certainty of the cost estimates, and perhaps secondary, can the control measures adopted in other risk situations be used effectively in the current scenario? So what do you include when designing a regulatory risk management program? The purpose of risk management is the creation and protection of value. Any regulatory risk program or management system must keep this in mind. The ISO 31000-2018 contains 8 principles to be used as guidance on the characteristics of effective and efficient risk management, which communicate the values and explain why it is in place and what its main objectives are. Proportionate, that's the first principle. Aligned, comprehensive, embedded, dynamic, informed, culture, improved. Principles 1 to 5 provide guidance for the company on how effective processes should be designed. The components of any regulatory compliance risk management framework should include 1, principles, the same principles above, the 8. Then you have to have a framework. So now you need to step back after you've done your risk assessment and you need to say whether or not this organization has a risk framework in place. And if it is an individual company, it just has a risk framework. If it is a company that's a part of a group, then it has an enterprise framework that covers the operations of all its subsidiaries. A framework which helps to integrate regulatory risk management into all activities and functions. And this is essential because the effectiveness depends on integration of the framework into the governance mechanisms of the company, influencing both control and strategic decision making. So what they're looking for is to see how you weave GRC in your answers. And it is difficult. Leadership and commitment, including aligning risk management with strategy, objectives, and culture of the company. Issuing a statement or policy that ensures a risk management approach, plan, or course of action. Integration, including determining management accountability. All of these are things to keep in mind when you write your recommendation. Design, including understanding the company and its internal and external context, articulating risk management commitment and allocating resources, establishing communication and consultation arrangements, implementing, developing an appropriate implementation plan including deadlines, identifying where, when, and how different types of decisions are made and by whom, modifying the applicable decision-making processes when necessary. Then there is evaluation, and then there is improvement. So you can see that the bulk of your answer when it comes to this scenario is writing the recommendation and writing it in a format that includes GRC. 3, processes of risk management, including the application of policies and procedures, practices, and ways of doing things, which involves communication, consultation, assessment, treating, monitoring, reviewing, reporting, and recording regulatory risk. And then it goes into each one of these as to what's included under each one. Y'all going silent? What happened?
We just listening.
Why?
This enough to shut anybody
I
up.
swear, I know what you wanna
Why?
say.
It's a lot for 3,500 words now, you know.
That's how you word it.
Listen, this gotta be so succinct,
Yes.
punchy, and to the point.
To the point. And you have to use GRC language.
That we know nothing about.
What you mean?
What that mean? What GRC language mean?
You're talking about governance, risk, and compliance. Which you should know now.
You all know that?
Yes.
You all-
Yes.
You all know that language? Okay.
You don't know the language.
Girl, I hope I know it.
You just gonna say.
Even if you thought you did, you
better
better
I
know.
hope,
You better know.
Can't even be sure no more.
No.
Hmm? You should know this language. When you use words like your risk assessment, your risk identification, your treatment, your monitoring, having the appropriate risk programs in place and policies and procedures are approved by the requisite persons involved and senior management, then you got it.
Slow down.
What you writing again? That in the chapter.
You know what, just be talking fast. Just go behind and listen to that.
What?
She would summarize what she said at the chapter.
It's in the chapter.
Yeah.
I mean, she was deep nuts.
What happened to yours?
I think I'd rather do property Jacobson to this.
You understand?
Right,
No,
Property Jacobson is my highest grade.
Well, the next one come on.
Right, you know.
Come on in the morning, eh?
The next one isn't out yet?
No.
No.
That should have been from last.
Yeah,
See,
normally.
coming up 5 o'clock in the morning.
I didn't see tomorrow.
You know, they always come on a Thursday after class.
Yeah, you keep that.
Yeah, that was a Thursday.
Keep that.
I don't even think what they do,
You understand?
And they go into the second paper right there. I don't need that. It should have said that a long time.
Right time.
Just wait by something. No, take me to write my first sentence.
but I.
I said that for a long time, is after trying to find the first sentence to put.
Listen, for a paragraph, it
Listen,
takes almost 6 hours.
You understand? I was like, what is
I go
going
to bed
on?
2 o'clock in the morning on one paragraph.
Did you start out with your risk assessment?
Yes, but after you do the risk assessment, then what?
Then you have to start writing.
How you take your risk assessment, your table, and put it into a paper?
You put in the words.
How?
What do you mean, how?
That's the problem we had.
Had it. I'm glad. It's the past tense.
To get a sentence. That was a struggle, so.
I still there. That means I shouldn't be here.
Why y'all not talking behind?
But you can pass this one off.
Oh, you I don't want you back.
This one?
They told me. She's like, okay, get one on the gate.
That's all you worry
That's
about.
what we get about. That's for me. You sure? It is people.
question doesn't speak to CSR.
What is that? What that is?
You're reading this book?
Yeah, what is CSR?
Corporate social responsibility.
Oh, let me write that down.
In the book.
It's in the book.
Yeah, we ain't
Where?
gonna worry about that.
You don't worry about that,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, we don't worry about that, don't worry about that.
They
Don't worry about it no more.
very rarely they ask a question on that.
Yeah,
I don't know if they'll give it to you in the next one.
they can skip that
You
rule.
say you gotta get past it.
You don't hardly do that.
See, we would have been further off in our paper if we didn't have a certain somebody for 4 weeks. That's all I have to say.
I don't know what their problem is. Go to section 7.4. Is rag tech the answer? So from the last 1, 2, 3, I'd say the last 4 years, board used to be AML and compliance. When they changed it to GRC instead of compliance, the whole issue became, do we need technology to perform this function? Because regulations just keep changing all over the world. So that is always one of the hot topics on the GRC, technology.
That's why they had them cell phone foolishness in this question.
Yes, everything is about technology. Technology used in regulatory compliance management is not new. But what is changing is the use of software to address the gap between those services which are enabled by software and those that are not. Those companies that are using the capabilities enabled by new technologies like cloud computing, big data, and blockchain are coming up with solutions to help them to comply with regulatory requirements. So in that role of being GRC, or as they call it, regulatory compliance or compliance, you have to be well versed in all of the regulatory requirements when it comes to cloud computing.
And that's all it is, no?
Everything is that anything that's technology driven, you do the laws of all of those and the rules. The characteristics of RegTech which make it useful in helping to address regulatory requirements are: data can be decluttered by technology to make it simpler and more focused. The speed at which reports can be configured and generated, often with multiple reports from the same data set. The speed at which solutions can be implemented. The use of intelligent analytical tools to analyze data and produce valuable information. So you need to ask yourself, based on your recommendation and the deficiencies that you found, whether or not the implementation of a software package to track these things would be useful.
No, and then you have to find out by heart, we have a tweak.
Yeah.
Like any banking software.
But they have software for everything.
I know, but you always have to have a tweak. This is no software that meets your needs.
No, so you have to tweak.
No,
Right, so you build it.
You have to
and
do
you
it.
find it by trial and error.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So some benefits of using RegTech is driving down the cost of compliance by simplifying and standardizing compliance processes through an automated mapping of regulatory risk, to key business processes, which removes the need for manual intervention and duplication and flexibility. So with this trend now towards RegTech, the examiners are looking for you to have things done manually. They're looking for it to be done automated. So you have to bring technology into it. Flexibility and growth can be accommodated if the solutions used are scalable, which is different from the more rigid enterprise-wide risk management system solutions. If RegTech software solutions are designed to work with other existing platforms, then it will enable more seamlessly linked control frameworks. And then it gives you the long-term benefits of RegTech. Now remember, now when you write a recommendation to the board, you're telling the board what they need in order to address this issue. And at the same time, you have to bear in mind cost. Cost not just to the risk, but cost also to what you actually trying to implement. What will it cost the organization? So it will enable innovation while enhancing consumer confidence as a result of better consumer experience, better consumer protection as a robust fraud control platform, better protection of the financial health of the company, improved governance because of transparency and proactive reporting of risk and compliance, and also a competitive advantage. So you have to be able to sell the board as to why you want to implement these things. So big data refers to a process that is used when traditional data mining and handling techniques cannot uncover the insights and meaning of the underlying data. Data that is structured or time sensitive or just very large cannot be processed by old-fashioned analysis methods. So based on your question, do we have a data issue? Okay. Who's in G?
I actually got cursed with
Oh, you did?
it. Yeah.
Pow, pow, pow.
Oh, Lord.
You know, personally,
One major thing that big data does for businesses is to inform them about customers or clients. Using tools like customer relationship management, big data sets show businesses who customers are, how they behave, and how they interact with the business. Commonly, CRM systems present carefully mined bits of data from big data sets in easy to access information sets that support sales or drive other efforts. So based upon the issues you see in the question, you need to do some research and find out if there are some software tools that are available that a company can purchase and adapt to meet the issues. Businesses that also use big data sets to identify performance standards or to help in the process of workforce management. And I think you do have a staffing issue. They can show businesses more about performance trends and what's happening in different company locations or cost centers. And they can also help to automate business processes, enable remote work, and other new forms of business operations. Along with all the above, big data can help businesses to set prices or work within a market context. Different kinds of data collection can enable a better bird's eye view of how a business is doing in the markets. So see, that's a very good selling point when you recommend to the board that you're going to use technology. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. Artificial intelligence can be defined as intelligence exhibited by machines. In computer science, the field of artificial intelligence research defines itself as a study of intelligent agent. That is, any device that perceives its environment and takes action that maximizes its chance of success at some goal. So whenever you speak about GRC, like I said, the last 4 years, they're moving away from having humans do this job to have computers doing the job.
Robots. No, be a robot and make money.
How you gonna make money with your robot?
That's all right.
You don't have no bills.
You got it.
So they said artificial intelligence is not new. The drive to create the capabilities of machines to simulate aspects of human intelligence has been envisioned for millennia, and artificial intelligence focused scientific and technological research pursued in the modern era for at least 70 years. So that's why they can program the machine to address each issue. What happened?
So you don't know what that means? One job you could find now is computer job.
Oh, you analyze the output.
And that's
So why we doing
and
this
that's
for?
doing the and that's doing the bare.
What we doing this course for?
It follows that the quality of the governance, management, and oversight of analytical activities which rely on artificial intelligence are extremely important to get right. Whether the application of the intelligence be in the social, government, military, or commercial domains. This recognizes that in the right hands, with strong and well-exercised governance, with well-formed goals informed by expert data scientists, artificial intelligence holds great potential to improve lives, economic efficiency, improve healthcare, and prevent financial crime, to name but a few of the key benefits now within reach. So they're not looking for no recommendations that are out of date. They're looking for futuristic recommendations that are realistic and will not cost the firm a lot of money. Now, part of the question, I think, speaks about regulatory issues and enforcements, correct? Okay, so, section 8. It's often said when a risk materializes, it becomes an issue. A regulatory issue can be defined as anything that indicates that a breach of regulatory obligation has taken place or suggests that a breach is likely to occur. So in your scenario, you have to decide whether a breach has occurred or is likely to occur. So example of breaches can include the conduct of unauthorized business, an error or oversight that results in poor treatment of or loss to a customer, a serious deterioration in the financial resources of a firm, leaving it with insufficient capital to fulfill the terms of its license. So in your scenario, what is the breach? Or what is the likelihood of the breach?
So you had an error.
That's the only one? So what to do if you have a potential regulatory breach? Before you do that, remember, this is GRC. You have to assess the risk. Always have to assess the risk, that's the first thing. You already identified the risk, but you have to assess the risk.
This chapter repeats itself, eh?
Yes, it
What?
does.
It just repeating itself, man, it's all falling over someone.
What? No, the first part we did last week showed you the process. Now, that process is just, put it like common knowledge. Now they want you to take it and put it in the context of GRC, which is different. Because when you do a risk assessment, a pure risk person, they say, okay, we're introducing this new M&M. M&M with, I don't know, coconut in the middle, right? So they'll do a risk assessment of this, how the market will like it. What's the price? What color should we put it? What size? That's what they're gonna look at. Compare this to other ones, compare this to competitors. They'll do all of that. But that's not what your question is talking about when you talk about GRC here. When you take that same risk assessment, you're looking at the risk and the how do you address that risk in relation to the firm. And you're telling the board how you're going to address this risk to reduce that risk and the cost. And you want to give them short term and you want to give them long term. But in order to come to that recommendation, you have to know what is the risk. And you know your institution. No, you gotta wrap your mind around what GRC is all about.
From doing all that stuff, that's why she
Are you
knows.
here?
Oh, she deep in it. She got kind of Baco and thing
That's
in it.
why
That's
she can't
why she
relate to
knows.
how difficult this paper is.
I don't even think that easy.
You have to try. Okay, first is assess how serious the regulatory potential breach is. You have to assess it. So looking at your scenario, what do you think of a scale of 1 to 10?
What's that? Sorry.
The breach.
It was a potential, it wasn't an actual one.
Right, so it's a potential breach.
But there's a lot of potential breaches, because they keep happening.
It's
They're real frequent.
So should a regulatory issue arise, the compliance professional is generally expected to assist in providing damage limitation solutions in the short term, and to implement a strategy to avoid similar breaches in the medium to long term. That's your job. For example, by amending the firm's systems and controls. And we said that already. So I already gave you all the answers, you know. All regulatory breaches are serious, but some are more serious than others. A compliance professional is expected to be able to assess the seriousness of each breach and respond proportionately. Issues to consider in applying a risk-based methodology to regulatory breaches include whether there is any criminality involved, the reason for the breach, and for this one, human error, or the deliberate circumvention of controls. Were the existing controls being applied? But were they not fit for purpose? Because sometimes you can have policies and procedures, they don't fit in what you do. The next one is the application and effectiveness of pertinent systems and controls. So you have systems and controls, but they may not be effective. The number of clients affected. Because it depends on the number of clients affected, it can increase the severity of the breach.
And then you gotta look up, cross jurisdictions and different things, so that the type of clients that apply.
The extent to which clients have been or could be affected, the amount and impact of any losses incurred, whether any impropriety took place, the fitness and the properness of individuals involved, and the possible reputational impact on the firm or the industry as a whole. So all the things you need to consider is right in this chapter. Right there. A compliance professional should be able to recognize or categorize the seriousness of a breach by adopting a risk-based approach. So you see how they started from Unit 5? They tell you there are two approaches. You take it risk-based or take it cyclical. But when you get to the very end, what they tell you is the best practice, a risk-based approach.
Why didn't you consider from the beginning?
You still not finished.
The categorization.
248, categorization.
8.1.
They just released something from the Compliance Commission, consultancy document
Yes.
from the FATF, and they went for law firms, they want look at the risk-based approach,
Mhm.
and how to use it, how to effectively use it.
And you gotta use it for every sector.
Yeah, and they, want everyone's input, so they could put it together. I thought that was neat that they did that.
That's the way policies are written.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, for that, they have to come up with that and say, hey, everybody in the community should come together. That's the kind of-
Yeah.
I mean, they throw things out and say, you better do this or else.
Yeah,
That's
but
how this go.
they'll leave that for the other bigger things to come. This a balanced approach also encourages staff to bring regulatory issues to the attention of compliance professionals. Safe in the knowledge that the issue will be treated on its relative merits and that mountains will not be made of molehills. It is, however, worth remembering that small-scale or isolated problems within the firm can develop into something larger if left unchecked. Even lower-risk regulatory breaches must be addressed. Things that go wrong in a small way have a habit of going wrong in a big way later. And several small breaches can be symptoms of something much larger. So in your issue, all the symptoms that you have, what is the bigger issue? Gives you symptoms. What's the bigger issue?
Staff don't know their roles, they should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening across all departments.
Right, so what's the bigger issue?
They told them to talk to some staff,
Nobody know what they
no one
doing.
know they doing. Come to board.
No, we're checking. I mean, like, checking.
The jacket, no, they jacket.
Well, the fact that the board is involved too, and the board wants an assessment, and they need to set the mandate, so in order to do that, they need to know what's going on. That's why
Right,
they
so,
call
right,
it.
that's why I asked for you now, what is the issue? What is the issue? You have the system. You have a little bit of pus coming out here, some blood coming out here, some water, but what is the issue? And that's what they want, examiner wants to see, do you know what the issue is?
So what the issue is again?
No one's telling you.
I
You have
thought
to figure that out.
Sorry,
No.
I thought I heard there was a lot going on.
Keep tricking, you know.
No, there was a lot going on, but true.
It's right up in there, but they don't jump out at you, you read it, you figure it out.
Yeah.
And
It's right in there. When you read it over and over again, you'll see what the issue is.
No question?
Uh-huh. It has one issue.
Mhm.
Everything else is symptoms of it that can lead to breaches, but they have one issue in that question. There's only one issue. Then the next thing you ask yourself is how widespread is the problem? That's like she said, it's all over. So when a regulatory issue arises, the priority is to assess the nature and extent of the problem. Compliance professionals should attempt to establish the whole extent of the issue so that having suitably identified it, they can tackle it in its entirety. So your recommendation have to address the issue in its entirety. Not just issues of trickle, but the main issue. So you have to actually cut the head off the snake. An issue should not be referred to an external agency without first accurately ascertaining its nature, materiality, and regulatory risk classification. So you know you must mention in your recommendation whether or not this is a matter that needs to be reported to your regulatory body. And it will be based upon what you wrote before, in terms of the risk classification, how widespread it is, how material it is. It should remember that the action necessary to correct a breach can subsequently be passed to an external agency, but the responsibility for correcting the breach cannot be transferred away from the regulated entity in which it arises. So even you may go and you outsource it to an auditing firm to come and check, see what the problem is, they come up with a recommendation, it's still the responsibility of the organization to implement that. Now, the next thing we speak about is internal investigations, conducting an investigation. This is when you have a regulatory breach. You have to do an investigation. And there are many reasons why a business will want to conduct an investigation, including to establish whether it is financially accountable, and if so, the amount of any compensation that it should pay, to avoid a reoccurrence, to demonstrate to the regulator that it's taking steps to avoid a reoccurrence, and to determine whether any disciplinary action against members of staff is appropriate and justify this accordingly. So based upon your question, do you think you need to do an investigation? Of whom? Managers. The result of the investigations to be relied upon, they must be conducted by persons who are completely independent of any involvement in the matter that is the subject of the investigation. Now don't forget, now you have the investigation points to the actual potential breach. Not the little streams. It's focused on the breach. It says the appointment of an external counsel with regulatory expertise can be very helpful in carrying out investigations and for determining steps for resolution. Such a counsel's main value lies in their broader knowledge of the marketplace and possible similar experience with other regulated firms. In the case of a matter requiring criminal investigation, an internal investigation is very likely to be inappropriate because of the risk that it will disturb evidence that would be of interest to the police. So you don't have that in this case. So, successfully conducting and reporting an internal investigation requires particular skills, including the ability to follow an audit trail, effectively interview employees and colleagues, preserve evidence, identify criminal conduct, assess evidence objectively assess fitness, deny properness and competence of employees, and advise on remedial action to prevent occurrence. I don't think, you still think you need to do an investigation? No, I don't think you actually have. Is it a potential breach? Someone actually did a breach? Or they says it's likely?
They said minor incidents.
Minor incidents. So then you have to qualify the examiner whether those minor incidents can escalate to a serious regulatory breach. Notifying the board. A basic checklist of those who should be told of the regulatory issues should be created. Who is informed will depend upon the severity of the breach. Suggestions include all directors. So how did this matter get to the attention of the board? Based on your scenario, how did this get to the board? Because remember now, to take something to the board, it has to be serious. Was it the potential breach of confidentiality? Is what triggered it to be reported to the board?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, notifying the board, all directors, the relevant board committee, the head office or parent company, the regulator, internal or external legal counsel, the police, internal or external auditors, and everything depends on the severity of the breach and the issue that the breach is about. So you know when you go into the police, or you go into the regulators, or you go into the auditors.
No, to say, potentially, I guess, to go to the board, because even though there are now misses and potential breaches.
Over a period of time?
Over a period of time.
On a
but they were
period of
still
time,
keeping record.
you keep record, and then you're able to tab it and say, guess what? Over the past last year, these near misses would have cost us X number of dollars. So even though they were near misses, there is the likelihood of having a financial loss if it increases or realizes. The role of the regulator is not necessarily only to undertake enforcement action, but also to be proactive in assisting firms to remedy deficiencies and continue in the conduct of their business. So it is important that firms report any regulatory breaches to their regulator so that they can take advantage of the help that the regulator is able to provide. So in this instance, do you think you need to advise the regulator of the potential breach? It's not that serious yet.
Yes,
No.
yes, yes.
Seriously.
I think it's more like an internal problem.
It's an
Get it
internal
resolved
problem.
immediately.
So
before
you could add in your recommendation
Yeah.
that the severity of this
Mhm.
would not warrant a report to the regulator. So you should examine, you covered all aspects. Notifying the regulator. In many jurisdictions, regulatory laws specifically require regulated businesses to be open, honest, and cooperative with the regulator, and that's that. Even where they do not, it is seldom in interest of a business not to inform a regulator of a problem that has been discovered. It is generally best practice for a firm to be open and frank and to make voluntary disclosure of all regulatory breaches. Following this is the UK. So what's required here locally? If there is a breach or potential breach, what is required by the regulators here?
Documents, back.
Yours is the compliance commission. So are you required to document it and advise?
It depends, I guess it depends on the severity of it. I know documented, I for one would just document it.
Mhm.
And if it's not severe, then I would document it and report it. Don't wait for them to come and see it, then they're gonna do an audit.
Compliance professionals should also be aware of any detailed reporting obligations. For example, many retail product providers have an obligation to notify regulators of specific control failures and breaches. They should also be aware of the evolving methods used by the regulators to gather data. Not only do they rely on data disclosed from retail product providers through regular reporting, but they may also now seek information through other methods. As a general rule, it is advisable to consider what remedial action needs to be taken before informing a regulator about a regulatory breach. Because you can't just go and say, I have a breach. How did you address the breach? How are you going to mitigate against it in the future? And how are you mitigating it now? The regulator may not agree with the way in which a business proposes to resolve a particular problem, but presenting a problem in conjunction with a solution demonstrates that the firm is attempting resolution and prevention of reoccurrence. The key to limiting the overall damage caused by a regulatory breach is as much about the way in which a firm reacts to the breach as the breach itself. Minor breaches can often be dealt with by telephone discussion with follow-up emails to confirm and document actions to be taken. More serious breaches, particularly where there is an impact on customers, should involve a meeting with the regulator, and this should be called as quickly as possible. In serious cases concerning high-risk regulatory breaches, the compliance officer should attend with at least one director and, if possible, the local chief executive. If a very serious issue has arisen, the meeting should include a senior staff member from the regulator's supervisory function. So in this instance, what do you think you should do?
This wasn't a serious breach, so.
It didn't happen, the customer.
No impact to the customer.
There's no impact to the
Okay.
customer.
I think it's no serious breach.
So what your approach will be?
Like I said, it's
Minor breach
I said the minor breach, but write a detailed report.
that can lead to
Oh, the potential.
a potential regulatory.
So
Document it and do it
it's a big risk.
internally.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a big risk though, if it could potentially lead to that.
Yeah, but then you have to say, you identified it,
Right.
now you assessed it,
Right.
And then what you did to.
what do you
So
do?
What you
it
gotta
doesn't
do,
become
what you
a
put in
potential.
place for it
Put
not
in
to happen
place,
again.
not to happen again.
And that's where you make a detail,
That's where the details come in.
Mm.
So the sanctions a regulator can impose. So if you're gonna apply this section to your recommendation, you need to tell the board if there is a potential breach, what the fines are. So then you go to the central bank administrative penalties regime, and you tell them exactly what the breach will be, what the fine will be, if there is a breach in the future, if this continues, and people do not adhere to the policies and procedures.
Could you start off with the breaches first? I mean, the policies first?
Now, when you say start off, what you mean?
When you talk about the central bank policy, the bank and trust act, all those.
But
You
would not
can
be in
start off
that,
your question by saying there's penalty?
I'm saying what it is, what's in place, and what the penalty will be in the event of the likelihood of whatever happening.
but wouldn't
How
potential,
would they know what you're talking about?
Yeah, they don't know what you're talking
They
about.
would know what you're talking about in the beginning.
You didn't tell them what the issue is.
Yeah.
Okay.
so,
They're
but
not
they,
in your recommendation when you
Yeah.
tell them. when you
At the end,
recommend it.
At
at the end, you're
Yeah.
saying if these things are not put in
Right.
place,
That's what
this is what will happen. This
Okay.
is what we will face. Yeah.
I think I list my issues first. And then I'll just write the different pieces everywhere.
But remember now, when you write, it has to flow,
Mm-hmm.
because you write into the board.
Right.
So you, before or not, they wanna know what's the issue.
They don't like to read what
No.
you came up, and slap it in the face.
Saying all that, they guess if they get fined, no, okay, enjoy your day.
We ain't losing no money right now.
Yeah, that's all they wanna know.
Yeah, yeah.
They truly.
Now, if you say it's a potential that we're gonna be fined for this amount of
then they
discontinuance.
gonna say,
Everybody
like,
wants
And the
like, hold on,
Yeah.
like how much,
Like,
like how much, like how much?
Right, so for the assignment it's 3,500 words, but if you were to go actually write it in real life, you're only writing for 30 words.
30 words.
Real talk.
Really.
One in
All of
paragraph,
that.
Listen.
distributed by
Or
email.
everything that you write, everything that you write in there, in this
Not for
long
you
thing,
personally, eh?
this is for you, they ask you questions.
Right.
Yes.
Like, how did you identify this risk? What plan are you putting in place? Because if at the same time you present this, you present your policy at the same time. This is the policy, and then you do a cover sheet and these are the changes to address the deficiencies. All they go together in one package. But they're not gonna read all of that. That won't happen.
At all. Sorry, excuse me.
I got a sister from Friends who was board of directors.
Say what?
I got a sister from Friends who was board of directors.
You mean to see how to write it?
Yeah,
But they don't write it. A corporate secretary writes.
I know they don't write, but they.
And the compliance writes.
I know what they're looking for, what they don't want to hear, what they want to hear.
So, Ms. Archer,
That's-
I have a
They want to
question,
hear,
right?
they want to hear what affects the bottom line.
I know, that's all.
That's it. Then they have to make sure the company is run properly. One, that is following rules and regulations. Two, that is making money.
We can talk about this.
Yeah.
What else you would business for?
I have a question.
Yes.
In terms of structuring the report, right? What would be the best way to go about it? Separating each, because you're saying it's one main issue, we understand that, but we still have to go through the whole different symptoms from the scenario. Would it be best to separate it by the different symptoms or risk events or whatever took place in the scenario, and then do the risk management, risk assessment on each one of those? Or would it be better to go through the whole
I'll
risk
tell you,
identification, risk
papers that get
description,
higher
risk whatever?
marks
Right,
are written with a flow,
I understand the flow. but-
not choppy. When you read it, it's read as if I was reading a whole board paper.
Right, but I still don't understand, like, how do you structure a whole board
You
paper?
only could structure it by rewriting it.
According to how it is in the scenario.
No. You write it like how you're saying it now. You start doing your block. When you finish, then you start to put them together. They have to weave together. Because when you go to the board, you go in one story. They don't wanna read paragraph, okay, paragraph. No, it's one story. It all flows.
I tell you, my
You can
friend
put
is
headings in
so
it if you want to,
I tell you, it's like that.
but it flows.
But I still don't know, see, I still don't know, okay, I'm using headings, but my issue is, am I separating my head, I don't think I'm making sense.
Just talk, yeah, come on.
Okay, like let's say the first issue, the primary issue or concern would be data, no, I'm not going to, data protection and confidentiality, right? In terms of the mail, misbreaches and stuff like that. Do I then go through the whole risk assessment process like that, or am I taking the whole thing?
That is what the question asks you.
But you still have to identify the risk, this.
But you have to answer the question. What did the question ask you?
Taking all of this consideration, write the recommendation of the board.
Okay, so in order to write the recommendation, that's why you do all the risk assessment.
And
So you're structuring it according to the different stages of the risk assessment, basically.
No, your structure is based upon your recommendation. And within your recommendation, you're gonna speak about these things.
No?
No.
Right.
It's
It's
wrong.
big over there, and then
Yes,
grab it and say,
yeah,
this
you
is
put it in there.
the summary of the risk assessment
You-
is recommendation.
Or everything that we've done in the last 3 weeks
Yeah,
is all your background work.
right. And you gotta take that and.
You take all
make a
that, put that
recommendation
together,
from
and you
that.
write your recommendation. Recommendation number 1,
Second.
recommendation number
That's-
2,
that ain't how you
recommendation
are.
number 3, recommendation
how you
number
are.
4.
Something like that.
I'm not admiring that.
And you pulling that from everything you've done in the last 3 weeks, all of your risk assessment. All of the policies, the
Exactly.
processes that need to be put in place.
Right.
What's required from the board, what do you want the board to do? What senior management will do, what will the employees
What's the
do? And how
timeline?
you in your role will monitor that this is done and report back to the board. That's what they want. We got it? So that's why I was saying, get started from when I walk in here. And then last week I said, do the risk assessment. If you haven't done it, put it in the table and put it there, because when you write your recommendation, you'll have a clearer picture of how you're addressing that risk. How you're prioritizing it. What's short term, what's long term, what's medium. And you may find at the end of the day, you can take 2 risks and put them together because of the time frame and the correlation between the 2. You can't do it if you don't do a risk assessment of each one of the issues you see.
The 2 risks have to be correlated, we have some relationship.
You have to be real,
Put them
yes. And then you have to discuss whether or not you're gonna have to make a comment to the regulator. And that's based upon the law. Say, is it material enough? Is it just an email, or is it a formal communication, or do you actually have to go and have a meeting?
Right there.
You gotta be using all those words.
Exactly.
Because when you talk about your solutions and your recommendation, like I say, you need to come to today's world. You need to say whether or not all of this could have been prevented if we had these things already in a software solution. They're looking to see how you're gonna bring this into modern day. How do you deal with these issues now? And most people have moved to software solution.
You're saying do a risk assessment of all the issues, but then earlier in the class you said there's only one issue, so I'm a bit confused. I thought I knew one main issue, but the
A mean issue,
Everything else is symptoms.
the symptoms.
of the issue.
There's one mean issue, and the rest of those are symptoms. Each one of those symptoms you have to risk assess. And when you risk assess each one, you will see there's only one issue. And that one issue could come from the lack thereof governance, the lack thereof risk, or the lack thereof compliance. And remember, because you're using a risk-based approach, you can even categorize that in your head. Which one of those take priority in this issue? leading to the damage that we have now. Was it lack of governance, lack of risk, or lack of compliance? Because they're not all equal. It's an easy paper.
So, Ms. Archer, do we have to show this, risk analysis in
No,
our answer?
no, you're gonna ask a
Okay.
question, you're gonna write a recommendation.
Oh,
That's your
recommendation.
source.
That's just
Okay.
your source,
Your
that's how
source.
to write the
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay.
So the paper's just strictly your recommendation.
Recommendations.
This is how you get there.
The paper is strictly recommendations, you said?
That's what the question
Okay.
asks you.
That's all
Alright.
right. See that bottom, that last paragraph?
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, all they give you is all the issues. So,
That's all
and
of
all of
it.
that, and all of that mud,
Yeah.
if you just say, let's sit down now and you're gonna say, let me write a recommendation, just from reading it, it won't be written properly. Because you have to assess each risk. What are the, based on the incident, what is the risk? Next incident, what is the risk? Next incident, what is the risk? How you gonna address it? How you gonna treat it? How you gonna monitor it? And by the time you finish going through each one of those incidents, each one of those risks, you can say, this is the problem.
You expand on that one.
And then you expand on that, because you're gonna say, to put all of this in place, this is what we needed. We need more direction from the board, that was what was missing. No, we didn't have the right person in charge of risk. We needed a risk officer, someone to direct the risk management policies and procedures. No, the next one was compliance. Compliance wasn't doing what it's supposed to do. If you had checks and balances in place, this would not have happened.
Everyone is lost in this particular.
So you have to analyze it. It's all about risk. And so what they're looking for you to weave in the G and the C with the R. And I can tell you, this is not the first time this question has come, nor the second or the third.
It's in
And people,
2016.
and people do not do very well on it.
They're always using those as the guinea pig, they do that with corporate vehicles, now they do that with this one.
That
What's
one
their
is not done
problem?
very well either.
I know, you said that,
Yes.
that's what I'm saying, they always use it.
That's why they keep bringing it back.
It's hard.
Because it's hard, so that means that nobody
Stop bringing it
doing
back.
Stop bringing it back.
It's hard.
They make you feel like you already the professional in that position and you know how to do that.
Exactly.
We trying to learn how to do that, I didn't know well.
They act like we've been, like, how you all been in your position, like.
For years, for 15 years and thing, and
And
then right on board.
right
Okay, no
on board.
problem. It's not even easy like that.
Okay.
Seen something people just be doing on a regular basis.
Cause we learning that.
What is how you learn it?
It's hard to listen, not this, not with this paper.
Well, wait till you see the next one. I don't know what it is.
We going over the new school, we read that last week.
You read it last week?
Yeah, but anytime.
I know, but
The
we said.
next set of points will be-
You could be here when it's time.
No.
No.
I know, so you need to be here.
Might as well do that now.
No, don't try it.
I gotta take that on. I gotta take that on.
Oh, anyhow, GRC will determine my fate.
Say what?
GRC will determine my fate.
No, don't forget, this one has 4.
For what?
The next one. The next question is 4. So I'll see you all at the end. Remember, that's what I told you all? I think y'all have me for the last class, right?
Question
Need
3?
your recommendation.
Okay, okay.
And it has 4 questions.
All right.
And if you take the email, people there is
I would say
7.
How you gonna do it, why you gonna do it, what it can cost.
And you'll
I
put all
said,
that.
and then it has some, into the future.
They don't, they're not doing an exam.
So I need to
No.
be written so that
Okay.
if something
So they
happens,
stop what? That's with exams? The
Yeah, them
last
too.
one?
Yeah.
Okay, that way. This, people in town, I get it just around the time. So I recommend.
So now, you don't run out of time.